Cashier laughs at Ivanka and Jared in store. The revenge was brutal. Sarah Martinez's day started like any other at the Upper East Side Whole Foods, with chaos in the employee break room. "I swear, if Jeremy calls out sick again, I'm going to lose it," Monica said, adjusting her green apron in front of the scratched mirror. She'd been working at the store for 12 years and had somehow maintained her ability to perfectly wing her eyeliner despite the pre-dawn start times. Sarah gulped down the last of her lukewarm coffee, grimacing at the bitter dregs. "He texted me already. Food poisoning, apparently." "Food poisoning my ass. It's his girlfriend's birthday. I saw her Instagram stories." Monica rolled her eyes, then turned to face Sarah. "Which means you're pulling another double, honey." Sarah's shoulders slumped. She'd already worked 3 doubles this week, and her feet felt like they were made of concrete. But what choice did she have? Her mom's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves, and the rent on her tiny studio had just gone up again. "At least the morning rush tips well," she said, trying to sound optimistic. "Girl, you need to take care of yourself. When's the last time you had a full night's sleep?" Sarah avoided her friend's concerned gaze, busying herself with retying her dark hair into a tighter ponytail. The truth was, she couldn't remember. Between the regular shifts, the doubles, and the online classes she was taking to finish her business degree, sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford. "I'm fine," she insisted, straightening her name tag. "Besides, isn't this what New York is all about? The hustle?" "The hustle is going to put you in an early grave," Monica muttered, but she was interrupted by their manager Mark's voice crackling over the intercom. "All cashiers to the front, please. We've got a line forming." The morning passed in its usual blur of organic produce and overpriced supplements. Sarah's register was popular with the regular customers. She had a way of making small talk that felt genuine without being intrusive, a skill honed over 6 years of service. "Mrs. Goldman, how's the book club going?" Sarah smiled at the elderly woman who always bought exactly 6 bananas and a copy of the New York Times. "Oh, Sarah dear, you wouldn't believe the drama. Margaret suggested we read something called 50 Shades, and poor Ruth nearly had a heart attack." Mrs. Goldman chuckled, counting out exact change from her coin purse. "I can imagine. Maybe stick to Jane Austen next time." These were the moments that made the job bearable. The small connections, the familiar faces, the tiny glimpses into other people's lives. But by hour 10 of her shift, even these bright spots were dimming under the weight of exhaustion. "Sarah, take your lunch," Mark called out around 2 o'clock, just as the afternoon lull was setting in. "Can't," she replied, already waving the next customer forward. "Karen's out sick too. I'll grab something quick between customers." Mark frowned. "You've been here since 5 a.m. You need to eat." "I'm fine, really." She wasn't fine. Her head was pounding, and she'd been fighting waves of dizziness for the past hour. But her mom's voice kept echoing in her head. "Mija, the medicine this month is $400. I'm so sorry to ask." The afternoon crowd brought the usual mix of nannies buying organic snacks for their charges, and personal assistants clutching lists of specific demands from their health-obsessed bosses. Sarah rang them up on autopilot, her thoughts drifting to the upcoming rent payment and the textbooks she still needed to buy for her next semester. "Did you hear who just walked in?" Monica whispered during a rare quiet moment, practically vibrating with excitement. Sarah was trying to fix a jam in her receipt printer, her fingers clumsy with fatigue. "The Kushners, Ivanka and Jared themselves. They're in the produce section right now." Sarah's hands stilled on the printer. "Seriously? Here?" "I mean, they live nearby, but usually they send assistants. Must be trying to seem more relatable or something." Monica peered around the end of the aisle. "Oh my God, she's wearing Lululemon like she's a regular person." Sarah felt something twist in her stomach. She thought about her mom, rationing her medicine to make it last longer. About her cousin Diego, who'd been deported despite living in the States since he was 3. About the immigrant families she used to volunteer with at her church, before she had to take on more shifts to make ends meet. "They're heading to checkout," Monica reported. "I think they're coming to your line." Sarah's printer chose that moment to start working again, spitting out a long stream of backed-up receipts. She was still trying to sort them when she heard the quiet murmur of voices approaching her register. Looking up, she found herself staring directly into Ivanka Trump's perfectly made-up face. The former first daughter, was indeed wearing Lululemon yoga pants and a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Jared stood slightly behind her, tapping at his phone, the fluorescent lights glinting off his wire-rimmed glasses. "Good afternoon?" Sarah managed, her customer service voice kicking in automatically. She began scanning their items: organic dragon fruit, imported mineral water, artisanal sourdough bread, cold-pressed juice that cost $12 a bottle. "The dragon fruit are particularly good this week," Ivanka commented, her voice carrying that peculiar mix of polish and forced relatability that Sarah remembered from television appearances. Sarah nodded, continuing to scan. The total was climbing past $200, and they weren't even halfway through. That's when it hit her, the absurdity of it all. Here she was, working her second double shift this week, barely able to afford her mom's medicine, serving people who'd helped make policies that had hurt so many families like hers. It started as a small sound in the back of her throat. She tried to swallow it down, but couldn't. The laugh bubbled up, bitter and sharp and completely inappropriate. It burst out of her in a harsh bark that drew stares from nearby customers. Ivanka's practiced smile flickered. "Is something amusing?" Sarah's laugh died in her throat as reality came crashing back. But it was too late. She could feel Jared's steady gaze on her, see his fingers moving purposefully across his phone screen. "No, ma'am," she managed, her hands trembling as she resumed scanning items. "I'm sorry, it's been a long day." The rest of the transaction passed in excruciating silence, broken only by the mechanical beep of the scanner and the rustle of paper bags. Sarah could feel Monica's eyes on her, could sense Mark hovering nervously nearby. But all she could focus on was the cold knot of dread forming in her stomach as she watched Jared continue typing on his phone. As they left, Sarah heard Ivanka say quietly to her husband, "That was rather inappropriate, don't you think?" Jared's response was too low to hear, but Sarah saw him nod once, decisively, before slipping his phone into his pocket. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of anxiety and regret. Every time her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, her heart rate spiked. By the time she finally clocked out at 9 p.m., her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type in her employee number. "Sarah? Wait," Monica called as she headed for the employee exit. "Are you okay? What happened earlier?" "I don't know," Sarah replied honestly, her voice small. I couldn't help it. I was so tired, and seeing them there, acting so normal." "Maybe nothing will come of it," Monica offered, but they both knew better. In the age of social media and instant outrage, nothing went unnoticed, nothing went unpunished. Sarah's phone buzzed again as she stepped out into the cool evening air. This time, she looked at the screen. Her Twitter notifications were already starting to climb. "Oh, God," she whispered, staring at her phone as the first wave of angry messages began to roll in. "What have I done?" Her tiny studio apartment felt even smaller than usual as she paced the 14 steps from her kitchen corner to her Murphy bed. The room still smelled faintly of the arroz con gandules she'd made 2 days ago, her mom's recipe a futile attempt at comfort during another sleepless night. Her phone rang, her mother's picture lighting up the screen. "Mommy?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Mija, are you okay? Your cousin Jennifer just called me. She said she saw something on Twitter about you and—" "I messed up, Mammy," Sarah interrupted, sinking onto her second-hand IKEA chair. "I really messed up. Tell me everything," her mother said, and Sarah could picture her settling into her favorite armchair, the one with the worn armrests and the crocheted blanket always draped over the back. Sarah told her about the double shifts, the exhaustion, the moment when everything just became too much. As she spoke, her Twitter notifications kept buzzing, an angry swarm she was trying desperately to ignore. "Ay, mi amor," her mother sighed when Sarah finished. "You know what your abuela always said. La risa más cara es la que sale sin permiso. The most expensive laugh is the one that comes without permission," Sarah translated automatically, a sob catching in her throat. "I know, Mammy, I know." "Listen to me. Sarah Elena Martinez." Her mother's voice turned stern. "Whatever happens, we face it together, entiendes? Your father didn't cross a desert for us to live in fear." A notification banner slid across her screen. "Mark, manager, was calling." Sarah's stomach lurched. "Mammy, I have to go. Work is calling. Call me back after, no matter what time. Te quiero mucho." Te quiero también, mami. Another email arrived on her phone. Miss Martinez, after careful consideration, we must rescind our invitation for a second interview. While your qualifications are impressive, we feel that your recent public behavior does not align with our company values. This was from a job she'd interviewed for last week, before any of this happened. Before one laugh had turned her into a pariah. The phone she'd briefly switched back on buzzed again. Her mother. Mija? Her mother's voice was tight with worry. There are people outside my house. They're saying things, taking pictures. What's going on? Sarah's blood ran cold. Mammy, call the police. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming over. No, don't come here. They're waiting for that. I'm okay, I'll stay inside. But Sarah, what they're saying about you online. Don't read it, Mammy, please. Too late. Your cousin showed me. How can they say such things? You're the gentlest person I know. You volunteer at the church. You help old ladies with their groceries. Sarah sank to her kitchen floor, pressing her forehead against the cool cabinet door. It doesn't matter anymore. None of that matters. They've decided who I am. Then we fight back. We tell the truth. The truth? Sarah laughed bitterly. The truth is, I laughed at the wrong people. People with power. People with connections. And now, she trailed off, remembering Jared Kushner's cold stare, his fingers moving purposefully across his phone screen. Now, what, Mija? Now I'm watching everything I've worked for disappear, and there's nothing I can do about it. After hanging up, Sarah sat in silence, listening to the familiar sounds of her building. Mrs. Kowalski's television upstairs, the Rodriguez kids playing in the courtyard, the ancient radiator's persistent clanking. Soon, these sounds would belong to someone else's life. Someone who hadn't laughed at the wrong moment. Her phone buzzed with another unknown number. This time, she answered. Sarah Martinez? This is Thomas Williams from the New York Post. We're running a story about your history of anti-Semitic social media posts. What posts? Sarah interrupted. We have screenshots of tweets from 2019 where you allegedly. Those aren't real. I never posted anything like that. But even as she protested, she knew it didn't matter. The story was already written. Her role had been cast. She was no longer Sarah Martinez, the hard-working daughter of immigrants who pulled double shifts to help her mother afford medicine. She was Sarah Martinez, the Whole Foods worker who laughed at Ivanka Trump, the racist, the anti-Semite, the cautionary tale. A notification popped up on her laptop. Her bank's app needed immediate attention. With trembling fingers, she logged in, only to find her account had been frozen pending investigation of suspicious activity. The walls seemed to be closing in. Every ping of her phone brought a new disaster. Every email contained another door slamming shut. Even her social media accounts were beginning to disappear. Instagram gone, LinkedIn vanished, Twitter suspended for violation of community guidelines. By sunset, Sarah Martinez as she had existed yesterday morning was effectively gone. In her place was a digital specter, a creature created by headlines and hashtags, whose real story would never matter as much as the story they wanted to tell. She curled up on her Murphy bed, still in her Whole Foods uniform, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in this city, in some expensive penthouse, did they know what they'd done? Did they care? Or was this just another day, another problem solved with a few phone calls, another reminder that in their world, even laughter had consequences? The radiator clanked. Mrs. Kowalski's television droned on. The Rodriguez kids laughed in the courtyard. And Sarah Martinez, who had dared to laugh at power, lay in the growing darkness, wondering how many more pieces of her life would disappear before the sun rose again. The sound of breaking glass jolted her awake. For a moment, she was disoriented, still in her uniform, the events of the day feeling like a bad dream. Then she heard the shouts from the street below. Come out, you communist bitch. Another crash. Sarah crawled to her window, staying low. Through the gap in her curtains, she could see a group of men in the street, their faces lit by phone screens. One of them was filming while another picked up another bottle. Her phone vibrated. A text from Mr. Chen. Police are coming. Stay inside. Don't turn on lights. Sarah hugged her knees to her chest in the darkness, trying to make herself as small as possible. The voices outside grew louder. We know you're in there. Can't laugh now, can you? Go back to Mexico. Her hands shook as she dialed Monica. Sarah? Oh, thank God. I've been so worried. Can I stay with you? Sarah's voice cracked. Just for tonight. There are people outside my building. They're throwing things. I'm coming to get you. Don't move. No, don't come here. They're watching the building. I'll find a way out. The sound of sirens cut through the night. The crowd below scattered, their shouts fading into the darkness, but Sarah knew they'd be back. They had her address. They had her mother's address. They had everything. Her phone buzzed with a new email. Dear Miss Martinez, this letter is to inform you that your credit card accounts with Citibank have been closed effective immediately due to violation of our terms of service. Another notification. Your auto payment for student loan number 247,890 has failed. Immediate action required. And another. Your health insurance coverage will terminate in 24 hours due to employment status change. Sarah opened her banking app again, hoping the freeze was temporary. Instead, she found a new message. Account closed per institutional policy. The radiator sputtered and died, leaving her in cold silence. Even the familiar sounds of her building felt different now, threatening rather than comforting. Every footstep in the hallway made her heart race. Every car that slowed outside her window could be bringing more people with bottles and phones and hate. Her mother had always told her that America was a land of second chances. But as Sarah sat in her dark apartment, listening to the echoes of broken glass being swept up below, she wondered if that was still true. Or had social media created a world where one mistake, one moment of unguarded emotion, could erase a person completely? The notification light on her phone blinked steadily in the darkness. Each pulse another piece of her life being dismantled, another door closing, another bridge burning. She thought about deleting her accounts, but what was the point? They already had everything they needed. Her face, her name, her address, her history. All of it twisted and repackaged into a weapon to be used against her. Her phone rang again. Another unknown number. This time, a familiar voice spoke before she could hang up. Sarah? This is Mark, from Whole Foods. Mark? Why are you calling so late? Listen, I'm not supposed to talk to you, but someone came into the store today. Expensive suit, government ID. He was asking questions about you, about your politics, about any suspicious behavior you might have shown in the past. Sarah's blood ran cold. What did you tell them? Nothing, I swear. But Sarah, what's happening to you? This isn't normal. Even for a viral video, this seems coordinated? Sarah finished quietly. There was a long pause. Be careful, okay? And delete this number. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, then slowly began to delete everything. Her photos, her contacts, her message history. 6 years in New York reduced to digital ashes. But she knew it wasn't enough. The real damage was already done, spreading through servers and screens across the country, far beyond her reach. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to live in a world where her name had become toxic, where every job application would meet a wall of suspicious Google searches, where every new acquaintance was one search away from finding the worst moment of her life, endlessly looping in high definition. But tonight, in her dark apartment, with the sound of distant sirens and breaking glass still echoing in her ears, Sarah Martinez finally understood what her father had meant when he said that freedom in America was like walking on ice. One wrong step, and you could disappear into the cold. 2 weeks after what the internet had dubbed the Whole Foods incident, Sarah sat in a coffee shop in Brooklyn across from Andrea Chen, the hiring manager for a small marketing firm. It was her 4th interview this week, and she'd started to recognize the exact moment when things went wrong. Your resume is impressive, Andrea said, scrolling through her tablet. The customer service experience would be valuable for our client relations team. Sarah allowed herself a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe this time. However, Andrea's finger stopped scrolling, her expression shifting subtly. There seems to be a situation when I Google your name. There it was. That moment. I can explain. Sarah started, but Andrea was already shaking her head. I'm sure you can, but we're a small firm. We can't afford any controversy. I'm sorry, but I don't think this is going to be a good fit. Outside the coffee shop, Sarah checked her dwindling bank account on her new prepaid phone, the only kind she could get now that her credit was destroyed. The severance pay from Whole Foods was almost gone. Her phone rang, one of the few numbers she still answered. "Mia?" Her mother's voice sounded strained. "Are you sitting down?" Sarah's stomach clenched. "What's wrong?" "The pharmacy. They won't fill my prescription anymore. They say our insurance was canceled. But I paid the Cobra payment. I have the confirmation email. They're saying it was reversed. Something about fraud prevention measures. I don't understand." Sarah leaned against a brick wall, feeling the rough texture ground her in reality. "How many pills do you have left?" 3 days worth. Maybe 4 if I split them." "Don't split them. I'll figure something out." But they both knew her options were running out. Every job application met the same Google search wall. Every attempt to open a new bank account was mysteriously rejected. Even her unemployment claim had been flagged for review, a status that hadn't changed in 2 weeks. "Sarah?" A familiar voice made her look up. It was Mrs. Goldman from Whole Foods, clutching her usual New York Times. "Mrs. Goldman, how are you?" The elderly woman glanced around nervously. "I've been worried about you. Monica told me what happened. It's not right, what they're doing." "They? Who's they?" Mrs. Goldman lowered her voice. "My grandson works at a law firm downtown. He says certain people have been making calls, asking questions, making suggestions." A young man passing by did a double take, looking at his phone then at Sarah. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. "I should go," Sarah said quickly. "It was nice seeing you, Mrs. Goldman." "Wait!" Mrs. Goldman pressed something into her hand. "For emergencies," she whispered, hurrying away. Sarah waited until she was alone to look. $500 in cash, wrapped in a receipt for 6 bananas. Her phone buzzed with a news alert she hadn't subscribed to. Exclusive. Whole Foods harassers' history of hate. Sources reveal pattern of extremist behavior. The accompanying photo was from her quinceañera, her 15-year-old face twisted into something sinister by careful cropping and shadow. The article cited anonymous sources, claiming she had a history of discriminatory comments and radical political affiliations. "But I've never," she whispered to herself, scrolling through quotes she'd never said, posts she'd never made, meetings she'd never attended. Her phone rang again. Her friend Maria. "Sarah, where are you? You need to get to your mom's place right now." "What? Why?" "There's a news van outside her house. Some reporter is doing a live segment about the family history of the Whole Foods harasser. They're interviewing her neighbors." Sarah's hands shook as she pulled up a rideshare app, then remembered her account had been suspended. She ran for the subway instead, her heart pounding with each step. By the time she reached her mother's street in Queens, a small crowd had gathered. A reporter in a blue blazer stood in front of a camera, gesturing at the modest house where Sarah had grown up, raising questions about the family's connections to radical political groups. "Mammy," Sarah called out as she ran up the steps. "Don't answer the door. Don't talk to them." But her mother was already on the porch, her face flushed with anger. "You want to know about my family? I'll tell you about my family. My husband died building this country's skyscrapers. My daughter works 2 jobs to help pay for my medicine. We are not criminals. We are not radicals. Mom, please." Sarah tried to pull her inside, but the reporter was already shoving a microphone in their faces. "Miss Martinez, can you comment on your daughter's history of anti-Semitic social media posts?" "What posts?" Sarah's mother demanded. "Show me these posts." "And your family's alleged connections to extremist groups in Mexico?" "Extremist groups?" Sarah's mother laughed bitterly. "I was a school teacher in Guadalajara. The only group I belong to is the church choir." Sarah finally managed to get them both inside, locking the door as cameras flashed through the windows. "Mammy, you shouldn't have gone out there. They'll twist everything you said." "Let them," her mother shot back. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of watching them destroy my daughter with lies." Sarah's phone buzzed, another news alert. "Mother of Whole Foods harasser confronts media in unhinged rant." "See?" Sarah showed her mother the headline. "They're already spinning it." Her mother sank into her armchair, suddenly looking very tired. "What do they want from us, Mija? Why are they doing this?" Sarah thought about Jared Kushner's cold stare, his fingers moving across his phone screen. 1 call. That's all it would have taken. One call to the right people, setting in motion a machine designed to grind people like her into dust. "They want us to disappear, Mammy," she said quietly. "And they're very good at making people disappear." A brick crashed through the front window, sending glass shards flying across the living room floor. Sarah pulled her mother down as more rocks followed. "Get out of our neighborhood. Go back to Mexico? Communist trash." Sarah's hands shook as she dialed 911, but she already knew what would happen. The police would come too late. The crowd would disperse. No one would be arrested. And tomorrow, there would be articles about the unsafe atmosphere in the neighborhood, about local residents' concerns, about questions regarding the family's legal status. Her mother's neighbor, Mrs. O'Malley, appeared at the back door. "Come on, quick, before they come around back." They slipped through Mrs. O'Malley's house and out onto the next street, the sound of breaking glass and angry voices fading behind them. "You can't go back there," Mrs. O'Malley said as she helped them into her car. "They'll be watching the house." "But where can we go?" Sarah's mother asked. "All our things." "My sister has a place in Pennsylvania," Mrs. O'Malley offered. "Small town. People mind their own business there." Sarah stared out the car window as they drove away from the only home she'd ever known. The news van was still there. Cameras pointed at the dark house, waiting to capture more content for their story about the dangerous family in their quiet Queens neighborhood. Her phone buzzed one last time before she turned it off. "Your LinkedIn profile has been permanently suspended for violation of community guidelines." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. They were thorough. She had to give them that. Every digital footprint erased. Every account closed. Every connection severed. Even her mother's substitute teaching job would probably be gone by morning. Collateral damage in the campaign to make the Martinez family disappear. "Mia." Her mother reached back to squeeze her hand. "Remember what your father used to say about storms?" Sarah nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "No matter how dark the sky gets, the sun is still there. We just have to survive until morning." But as Mrs. O'Malley's car merged onto the highway, heading away from the only city she'd ever called home, Sarah wondered if some storms lasted forever. If some laughs echoed until they drowned out everything else. If some mornings never came. Her mother began to pray quietly in Spanish, the familiar words mixing with the hum of tires on asphalt. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the sound of her own laugh in that Whole Foods store. How free it had felt. How honest. How real. How expensive. Mrs. O'Malley's car had just passed the New Jersey border when her mother's old flip phone rang. The sound startled them all in the quiet car. "Hello?" her mother answered. "Yes. This is Elena Martinez." A long pause. "But I've been teaching there for 3 years." "I don't understand." Another pause. "Yes, I see. Thank you for letting me know." The phone clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the dark car. "The school?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. "They said there have been complaints from parents about safety concerns." Her mother's voice cracked. "They're terminating my substitute teaching contract." Mrs. O'Malley gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Those bastards. Pardon my French, Elena, but they're going after a substitute teacher? Really?" Sarah's guilt threatened to suffocate her. "Mammy, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "No," her mother cut her off sharply. "This is not your fault, mija. You laughed. That's all. In a free country, that shouldn't be a crime." Sarah's burner phone vibrated. A text from Monica. "They came to the store today, men in suits, asking everyone questions about you, about your politics, about your family. Mark tried to defend you, but Sarah, I'm scared for you." Another message came through. "Don't trust Anion with a 212 area code. My cousin works at a security firm. Says there's a whole operation running. Stay safe." The highway stretched endlessly ahead, streetlights casting intermittent shadows across their faces. Mrs. O'Malley turned on the radio for distraction, but the news was already there. Sources close to the family suggest ties to radical political organizations. The incident at Whole Foods appears to be part of a larger pattern of. Mrs. O'Malley quickly changed the station. "We'll need to stop for gas soon," she said, checking the gauge. "But we should wait until we're further out. Too many cameras at the stations near the city." Sarah checked her mother's pill bottle in the dim light. 3 pills left. Not enough to make it through the week. How would they get her prescription filled in Pennsylvania? How would they pay for it? Every path forward seemed blocked, every solution out of reach. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert she couldn't remember subscribing to. Breaking. Former employer reveals troubled history of Whole Foods harasser. The article quoted an anonymous former supervisor claiming she had shown concerning behavior patterns and antisocial tendencies. Sarah had never received anything but positive performance reviews in her life. "They're not just erasing my present," she whispered. "They're rewriting my past." Her mother reached back and squeezed her hand. "They can write whatever they want, Mija. We know the truth. Does the truth matter anymore, Mammy? When they control every platform, every narrative, every..." A bright spotlight suddenly illuminated their car from behind. "News van," Mrs. O'Malley muttered, taking a sharp exit. "They must have followed us. Hold on." She navigated through a series of small roads, the headlights still following at a distance. Sarah's heart pounded with each turn. How had they found them? Who had tipped them off? "There's a motel up ahead," Mrs. O'Malley said. "Old place. Cash only. No cameras. We'll hole up there until they lose interest." But as they pulled into the motel parking lot, Sarah's phone buzzed one final time. The message was from an unknown number, but the content made her blood run cold. "You can run, Sarah Martinez. But in today's world, there's nowhere to hide. A laugh may be free, but silence? Silence is priceless." She turned off the phone and dropped it into a puddle in the parking lot, watching as the screen flickered and died. In the distance, she could see the news van's headlights prowling the dark streets, hunting for their story. "Come on," Mrs. O'Malley urged, helping Elena with her bags. "Room 23, it's at the back, no street view." As they settled into the musty room, Sarah could hear her mother trying to muffle her coughs. The medicine would run out soon. The money would run out soon. Everything was running out. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom's cracked mirror. The face looking back at her seemed older, harder. Was this what they wanted? To break her? To make an example of what happens when someone dares to laugh at power? Through the thin walls, she could hear the television in the next room. Developing story about the radicalization of retail workers in upscale neighborhoods. Experts say the Whole Foods incident represents a growing trend of. Sarah turned on the bathroom fan to drown out the words. They had taken her job, her home, her reputation, her mother's job, their safety. But they couldn't take her laugh. The memory of that moment, pure, unfiltered, honest, was still hers. Even if it had cost her everything else. 3 months after the laugh that changed everything, Sarah sat in a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, across from Maya Chen, a journalist from an independent news outlet. The cafe was deliberately chosen. A tiny place in Bushwick, cash only, no security cameras, as far from the Upper East Side as you could get while still being in New York City. "Thank you for meeting me," Maya said, setting up her old-school tape recorder. "No phones allowed. That was Sarah's one condition. I know this isn't easy." Sarah wrapped her hands around her cooling coffee cup, studying the journalist's face for any sign of deception. She'd gotten good at that over the past months. "Why do you want to tell my story?" she asked. "Everyone else already has." Maya pulled out a thick folder. "Because what happened to you? It's happened before. Different circumstances, different people, but the same pattern." She spread out several printouts, news articles, social media posts, court documents. A moment of defiance. A powerful target. Then the systematic dismantling of someone's life. Sarah picked up one of the articles. The face in the photo could have been her. Another young woman. Another incident. Another life erased. What happened to her? Changed her name, moved to Canada, works as a house cleaner now. Maya pulled out another file. And him? Former professor. Made a joke at a fundraiser. Now he drives a truck in Alaska. Another file. Restaurant owner. Refused service. Restaurant's gone. House is gone. Family's gone. Why hasn't anyone exposed this, written about the pattern? Maya's laugh was bitter. 3 newspapers killed the story. 2 websites were hit with unexplained DDoS attacks when they tried. 1 journalist. She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "But I think I've found a way. Small outlet. Independent ownership. Encrypted servers." Sarah traced the rim of her coffee cup. "You know they'll come after you too. Probably. But somebody has to. Maya's phone buzzed. Her face went pale as she read the message. My editor. He says the story's been killed. Already? But we just sat down. Parent company received a call. Legal concerns. Maya's hands shook as she gathered her papers. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I really thought. Sarah watched her hurry out of the cafe, another ally lost to the invisible machine that had become her enemy. She'd seen it so many times now. People who wanted to help, who believed in truth and justice, until the pressure became too great, the risks too high. The barista was watching her with a mix of pity and fear. Sarah wondered if she recognized her from the endless news coverage, or if that hunted look had just become part of her features now. Outside, the Brooklyn streets were getting ready for evening. Sarah pulled her hoodie tighter, keeping her head down, a habit now. Her new phone, a basic burner, buzzed in her pocket. The number was blocked, but she answered anyway. These days, she didn't have the luxury of screening calls. Sarah Martinez? A man's voice, unfamiliar. This is David, from the Daily. She hung up. Another reporter. They still called sometimes, hoping to squeeze one more drop of content from her story. The Whole Foods harasser had become a convenient symbol for a dozen different narratives: retail worker radicalization, immigration threats, anti-Semitism in progressive spaces. The truth had stopped mattering long ago. Her actual story, the double shifts, her mother's medicine, the moment of raw emotion in front of the wrong people, was too simple, too human for their purposes. They preferred their version, the angry immigrant, the hidden radical, the cautionary tale. The L train was crowded with evening commuters. Sarah found a spot near the door, trying to make herself invisible. But then she saw it. A man reading something on his phone, her face on the screen. Some new article, some new angle. The man looked up, did a double take. Sarah got off at the next stop, even though it was nowhere near her destination. She walked the rest of the way to her new apartment in Pennsylvania. The building was the kind that didn't ask too many questions as long as you paid cash. Her neighbors were all people with stories they didn't tell, lives they were trying to rebuild or forget. Inside her studio apartment, Sarah opened her laptop, her only real luxury now, needed for her virtual assistant job. She worked for a company based in Singapore, using her mother's maiden name. The pay was minimal, but they didn't check social media, didn't Google their contractors. A news alert popped up. She still monitored certain keywords. A survival habit. Exclusive. New evidence in Whole Foods harassment case suggests deeper conspiracy. Sarah clicked, even though she knew she shouldn't. The article was a maze of innuendo and anonymous sources, connecting her to people she'd never met, organizations she'd never heard of. They were still at it, still spinning their stories, still making sure she remained useful as their cautionary tale. Her mother called. They talked every day now, but never for long. Too many phones had been hacked, too many conversations recorded and twisted. Mija, are you eating? Yes, Mommy. It wasn't exactly a lie. She ate enough to survive. The new medicine is working better. Cheaper, too. They didn't talk about how they got the medicine, about the network of sympathetic pharmacists and retired doctors who helped people like them, people who had fallen off the grid. I saw Mrs. Goldman yesterday, her mother continued. She asks about you. Many people do. Sarah closed her eyes. She missed them all, her old customers, her co-workers, her life. But that Sarah Martinez was gone, replaced by a digital ghost that haunted news sites and social media, a creature of headlines and hashtags. How's the new job? Her mother asked, changing the subject. Fine. The time difference is hard, but... Sarah stopped as her laptop screen suddenly went black. When it rebooted, her work account was locked. No explanation, no warning. She didn't tell her mother. There would be another job, another name, another way to survive. There had to be. After hanging up, Sarah stood at her window, looking out at the Pennsylvania night. Somewhere in Manhattan, in some expensive penthouse, did they ever think about her? Did they remember the laugh that had offended them so deeply they'd erased a person to punish it? Her new neighbor, an elderly woman who kept to herself, was in the hall struggling with her groceries. Let me help you, Sarah offered, taking some bags. Such a nice girl, the woman smiled. What's your name, dear? Sarah hesitated. Which name? Which version of herself was safe here? Maria, she said finally, using the name on her latest set of papers. Just Maria. The old woman chatted as Sarah helped her put away the groceries, talking about her grandchildren, her cats, her life. Normal things. Human things. Sarah felt tears threatening. When was the last time someone had talked to her like a person, not a pariah? Back in her own apartment, Sarah opened her window to let in the cool night air. From somewhere down the street, she heard laughter. Real laughter. Free and unguarded. She remembered how that felt. Would she ever laugh like that again? Her burner phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. Hello? Miss Martinez? This is Michael from the Times. We're doing a follow-up piece on radicalization in retail spaces. She hung up, then dropped the phone into a drawer. Tomorrow she would get a new one, a new number, a new name. The cycle would continue. But tonight, in her small apartment in a small town, Sarah Martinez allowed herself to remember the laugh that had cost her everything. It hadn't been elegant or sophisticated. It had been raw and real and human. And somewhere in America, in some comfortable home with manicured lawns and security systems, someone was showing their children her story. See? They would say. See what happens when you step out of line? When you forget your place? When you dare to laugh at power? Sarah closed her window as the night grew colder. Tomorrow she would look for another job, another apartment, another piece of her shrinking world. But tonight, she sat in the darkness, listening to the distant sound of free laughter, remembering when she too had been that unafraid. The note in a Manhattan penthouse still read, "Handled." But in a small Pennsylvania apartment, Sarah Martinez whispered to herself, "I'm still here," even if no one could hear her anymore. Late that night, Sarah's laptop pinged with an email from Maya, the journalist. "I'm sorry, they didn't just kill the story. They shut down our entire outlet. Financial restructuring, they're calling it. Everyone's out of a job. But I saved something for you. All the research, all the similar cases. Maybe someday someone will be brave enough to tell it. Delete this email. Stay safe." Sarah downloaded the encrypted file before it could disappear. Page after page of familiar stories. Lives erased, careers destroyed, families scattered. Each one started differently. A comment, a gesture, a tweet, a laugh. But they all ended the same way. Silence. Her doorbell rang, making her jump. Through the peephole, she saw Monica from Whole Foods, looking nervous. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked through the chain lock. "How did you find me?" "Mrs. Goldman's grandson. He helped track you down. We've been worried sick." Monica's voice cracked. "Can I come in, please?" Sarah hesitated, then undid the chain. Monica rushed in, hugging her tightly. "Girl, you look like hell," Monica said, taking in Sarah's weight loss, her darker circles. "Are you eating?" "I'm fine, but you shouldn't be here. They might be watching." "Let them watch. I quit Whole Foods anyway. Couldn't stand it after what they did to you." Monica sat on Sarah's worn futon. "Half the staff quit, actually. Mrs. Goldman stops by every day to ask about you. Even Mark, he's been trying to find a way to help." Sarah sank down beside her friend. "There's nothing anyone can do. They're too powerful." "Maybe not." Monica pulled out her phone, showing Sarah a private social media group. "Look how many people are sharing similar stories. Not just about them, about others like them. People with power who can erase lives with a phone call." "It doesn't matter," Sarah said quietly. "No one who can help will listen, and those who listen can't help." Monica grabbed her hand. "Come back to New York. Stay with me. We'll fight this." "Fight what?" "They own the narrative. They own the platforms. They own—" Sarah gestured at her bare apartment. "Everything. They don't own you." Sarah's laugh was hollow. "Don't they? I work under a fake name. I live in a city I never wanted to be in. I can't use social media, can't open a bank account, can't even get my mother's medicine without help from underground networks. What part of me isn't owned by their power to erase me?" Monica's phone buzzed. A news alert. Her face fell as she read it. "What now?" Sarah asked. They're running another story. about how you've gone underground and joined extremist networks. They're calling you a cautionary tale about the pipeline from retail work to radicalization. Sarah walked to her window, looking out at the quiet Pennsylvania street. Somewhere out there, thousands of people were reading about her. Not the real her, but the version they had created. A digital ghost, a modern boogeyman, a warning to others who might dare to laugh at power. "You know what the worst part is?" she said softly. "That laugh, it was real. It was probably the most honest moment of my life. Seeing them there, acting like regular people, while my mom was rationing her medicine." She turned to Monica. "But they couldn't allow that honesty. It revealed too much." Monica's phone buzzed again. Her face went pale. "What?" "Someone posted my location. They know I'm here. There's already a camera crew on the way." They moved quickly, gathering Sarah's essential documents, her laptop, the burner phone. She'd gotten good at quick exits. "Where will you go?" Monica asked, tears in her eyes. "Don't tell me. It's safer if you don't know." Sarah hugged her friend one last time. "Take care of Mrs. Goldman for me." An hour later, on a midnight bus heading west, Sarah opened Maya's encrypted files again. So many stories, so many lives disrupted. Not all by the same people, but all following the same pattern. Power protecting itself, using modern tools to enforce ancient rules. Her mother had always told her that America was the land of the free. But as the bus rolled through the darkness, Sarah wondered if that freedom had always been conditional. Laugh, but not at power. Speak, but not too honestly. Live, but only within the lines they drew. She looked at her reflection in the bus window. Darker, harder, but still here. Still human. Still capable of laughter, even if she had learned to swallow it. Somewhere in a Manhattan penthouse, a note still read, "Handled." But on a midnight bus heading west, Sarah Martinez opened a new document on her laptop and began to type. "This is a story about a laugh." Because maybe that was the only resistance left, to keep telling the truth, even if no one was listening, to remain unhandled, even if unheard, to remember how to laugh even in silence. Sarah stared at her phone for 3 more rings before finally answering Mark's call. "Sarah?" Mark's voice was unusually hesitant. "We need to talk about what happened today. Corporate is, well, they're very concerned about the social media attention." Sarah closed her eyes. Through her thin walls, she could hear her neighbors arguing about whose turn it was to do the dishes, the familiar domestic squabble suddenly precious in its normalcy. "How bad is it?" she asked. It's not good. There's a hashtag trending, number Whole Foods hate crime." Sarah's laugh was hollow. "A hate crime?" I just laughed. "I know that, Sarah. But there's video." Her blood ran cold. "What?" "Someone in line recorded it. It's going viral. The comments are pretty intense." Sarah opened Twitter with trembling fingers. The video was there, at the top of her feed. 17 seconds of her tired face, her inappropriate laugh, Ivanka's frozen smile, Jared's cold stare. The comments below were a tsunami of rage, each one worse than the last. "Corporate wants you to come in early tomorrow for a meeting," Mark continued. 9 a.m. with HR. Sarah knew what that meant. 6 years of perfect evaluations, of covering extra shifts, of learning regular customers' names and stories. None of it would matter. "I understand," she said quietly. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the growing darkness of her apartment. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications, but she couldn't bring herself to look anymore. Instead, she walked to her window, gazing out at the Queen Street below. A family was having dinner in the apartment across the way, their warm kitchen light spilling out into the night. They were laughing at something, their faces bright with simple joy. Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool glass and allowed herself to cry. One laugh, that's all it had taken. One moment of unguarded emotion in a world where every second could be recorded, shared, twisted into something ugly. Tomorrow would bring consequences. But for now, in the gathering dark of her tiny apartment, Sarah Martinez remembered how it felt to laugh without fear. Sarah arrived at Whole Foods at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes early for her meeting. The store wasn't open yet, and the usual morning bustle of produce being arranged and shelves being stocked was absent. Instead, An uncomfortable silence hung in the air as she made her way to the back office. "Sarah!" Monica intercepted her by the time clock, still wearing her coat. "Girl, I've been trying to call you all night." "My phone died," Sarah lied. In truth, she'd turned it off after the 100th threatening message. "It's fine. I'm just here for a meeting with HR." Monica grabbed her arm. "It's not fine. Have you seen what they're saying about you online?" Fox News picked up the story. "They're calling you." "I don't want to know," Sarah cut her off. "Please, I can't right now." "Martinez," Mark's voice echoed from the back office. "They're ready for you." The conference room felt smaller than usual. Two women in corporate attire sat at the table, one she recognized as Regional HR Director Janet Phillips, the other a stranger in a severe black suit who didn't offer her name. "Please, sit down." Janet gestured to the empty chair across from them. Mark hovered awkwardly by the door. "I assume you know why we're here," the unnamed woman began, her manicured fingers tapping a manila folder. "The incident yesterday has created quite a situation." Sarah's throat felt dry. "I know, I'm sorry. I was exhausted and The time for explanations has passed," the woman interrupted. "This is now a matter of damage control. The video of your behavior has over 2 million views. This number Whole Foods hate crime is trending nationally. We've received thousands of complaints." "But it wasn't," Sarah started. Furthermore, the woman continued as if Sarah hadn't spoken. "Several conservative news outlets are running stories about political discrimination in our stores. Our CEO has received calls from multiple board members expressing their concern about brand impact." Janet at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Sarah, you've been a valuable employee for 6 years. Your record is spotless. But this situation—" "You're firing me," Sarah said flatly. "We're terminating your employment, effective immediately," the unnamed woman confirmed. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay, contingent upon signing this non-disclosure agreement." She slid a thick document across the table. Sarah stared at the paper, her vision blurring. "Do I have a choice?" "You always have a choice." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "But without the NDA, there's no severance. And given the current situation, I'd strongly advise against making things more difficult for yourself." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah read through the document. Words jumped out at her. "Waives all rights. Agrees not to disparage. Perpetual confidentiality." "Can I have some time to think about it?" she asked. "You have until the end of business today," Janet replied. "After that, the offer is withdrawn." Sarah's hand shook as she signed her name. 6 years reduced to a signature and 2 weeks' pay. "Your final paycheck and severance will be direct deposited," Janet explained, taking the signed document. "Please clear out your locker and return your name tag." "Can I at least say goodbye to?" "It's best if you leave immediately," the unnamed woman interjected. "Security will escort you out." A burly man in a dark uniform appeared at the door. Sarah had seen him around the store before, had even shared break-room conversations with him about his kids' Little League games. Now he wouldn't meet her eyes. Monica was waiting by the employee entrance, tears streaming down her face. "This is bullshit. You can't let them do this." "It's done," Sarah said quietly, hugging her friend. "Just take care of Mrs. Goldman for me, okay? Make sure she gets her 6 bananas." The security guard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Outside, the morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful. Sarah checked her phone out of habit, then immediately wished she hadn't. Her inbox had exploded overnight. "Communist trash. How dare you disrespect them? Go back to where you came from. We know where you live." Her Twitter mentions were even worse. People she'd never met were sharing her photos, her old social media posts, her LinkedIn profile. Someone had even posted her mother's address. Her phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello? Is this Sarah Martinez?" a male voice asked. "Yes, who is?" "This is David Cooper from the Daily Wire. We're running a story about your anti-Semitic display at Whole Foods yesterday. Would you care to comment?" Sarah hung up, her hands shaking. Anti-Semitic? That wasn't. Her phone rang again. Another unknown number. "Sarah Martinez?" This time, a woman's voice. "Rebecca Stone from Channel 7 News. We'd love to get your side of the story." She ended the call and switched off her phone. The 6-minute walk to the subway felt like running a gauntlet. Every person who glanced her way seemed to be recording, judging, waiting to catch another moment of her unraveling. On the platform, a man did a double take, looking from his phone to her face and back again. Sarah pulled her hood up and turned away, but not before she heard him mutter, "Disgusting." The train was packed with morning commuters. Sarah stood pressed between a wall of suits and screens, trying to make herself invisible. But then she saw it. Her own face, twisted in that fatal laugh, playing silently on someone's phone. The user was reading an article titled, "Wook Whole Foods Workers Racist Rampage." "This isn't happening," she whispered to herself. "This can't be happening." But it was happening. By the time she reached her stop, 3 more people had recognized her. One woman pulled her child closer as Sarah passed, as if hatred might be contagious. Her building's lobby had never felt like such a sanctuary. But as she checked her mail, hands still trembling, she found an envelope from her landlord. Inside was a notice. Her month-to-month lease would not be renewed. She had 30 days to vacate. "Miss Martinez." Sarah turned to find Mr. Chen, the building super, looking uncomfortable. "Some people were asking about you earlier," he said, shifting from foot to foot. "Taking pictures of the building. I told them to leave, but—" He trailed off, looking apologetic. "Thanks, Mr. Chen," Sarah managed. She took the stairs 2 at a time, not trusting herself to maintain composure in the elevator. Inside her apartment, she finally allowed herself to break down. The tears came in huge, gasping sobs that echoed off her bare walls. She thought about her mother's medicine, her upcoming tuition payment, her rent. Everything she'd carefully built over 6 years was crumbling. And for what? A moment of inappropriate laughter. Her laptop chimed, an email notification. Through blurry eyes she read, "Dear Miss Martinez, we regret to inform you that your student loan refinancing application has been denied due to recent changes in your employment status and credit profile." Sarah slammed the laptop shut. How did they know already? She'd just lost her job hours ago.